Let's go to your, your day job, foreign editor business. Fighting resumed, of course, this week in Gaza. We saw that report too, I think it was late Friday it broke, maybe Thursday night it broke. I certainly reported on it. The New York Times story that Israel was warned about the potential attack about a year ago. The conclusion was that the intelligence agencies didn't think it was plausible, so didn't react. I don't know how accurate that is, though. Hopes are fading too that the remaining hostages will be released. And of course, around the world, we heard this Tuesday that Jews are being warned that places like Australia are no longer safe from anti-Semitism. Give us your sense of where things are headed, Greg.
Well, this is a very grave moment for the world, Peter. The world is trying to put pressure on Israel to stop its operation. Israel must eliminate Hamas. Otherwise, Hamas has had a great victory. If Hamas stays in power in Gaza, no matter how much suffering it inflicts on the ordinary people of Gaza, it has had a great victory. It's inflicted the most obscene atrocities on Israel in its modern history, and it's stayed in power. And that would embolden Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Syrian and Iraqi militias and Iran. So Israel is facing a genuine existential threat. I do think it was undeniably an intelligence failure by the Israelis, and they have to deal with that in their own society and their own politics. But I also think, Peter, putting it more broadly, there is a global crisis of anti-Semitism today. This is a profound civilizational crisis in the West. This crisis of anti-Semitism is a symptom of a lot of other problems in the West, but it is a shocking, hideous hatred directed at the world's 16 million Jews. And here again, I think the Albanese government just hasn't had a schmick of an idea what it's dealing with. It's had no sense of the historic proportions of what's going on here and the need to, take the most resolute stand and trying to match it up, trying to equate it to some alleged Islamophobia. I mean, there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, 44 Muslim states and so on. There are 16 million Jews in the world. There is not a global crisis of Islamophobia. There is a global crisis of anti-Semitism, which is playing out in Australia, to which the Albanese government has not responded effectively.
What also concerns me, and I agree with that summary there, but what also concerns me is this idea that in the media, we should have, I think, voices of reason. In government, we should have voices of reason. You've got this moral equivalence between a democratic nation state with a rule of law that has put sort of suicide bombers in prison via a trial process, somehow equating the hostages with the prisoners, but also a terror organisation running Gaza as somehow legitimate in this debate, and all this misinformation and historical ignorance playing out in how people are responding to this crisis in countries like Australia, UK, US and more. That's what worries me longer term.
Well, you're right, Peter. The level of ignorance about the basic history of this, about how the whole Jewish populations all over Africa and the Middle East were expropriated and expelled, about the number of times all of Israel's Arab neighbours have attacked it with a view to destroying its very existence. The most powerful state in the region, Iran, rapidly acquiring nuclear weapons, saying it plans to wipe Israel off the map. So the question of proportionality in the morality of Israel's response, it's not acting proportionately to the shocking murder of 1,200 people and the sadistic rape and kidnap involved 250 other people. It's acting proportionately to an existential crisis, an existential threat to its very existence as a nation. And again, I just can't believe how bad the Albanese government has been on this. I mean, Penny Wong is in many ways the most formidable member of the government, but every time she talks about this, she effectively equates Israel and Gaza. She says, rather inexplicably, we've offered 800 visas to Palestinians, whereas, there are millions and millions of Muslims all around Palestine, but of course those nations don't offer refuge to any Palestinians. And she says, but never mind, we've offered 1,700 visas to Israelis, as though citizens of Israel, which have never ever posed any risk of extremism or anything in Australia ever in their history, and as you say, come from a democratic nation with the rule of law and so on, are to be equated with Gaza, which is drenched in anti-Semitism and hatred, and which elected Hamas as their government. Now that, you're still not indifferent to the terrible suffering which Hamas has wrought on its own people, but the government's absolute moral tin ear on all this, it just doesn't look like it exists in the real world. It exists in a sort of a Labor Party debating club or something where it's saying, well, let's balance off the votes of southwest Sydney. We don't want to upset the Jewish lobby. And by golly, we got challenge from the Greens in our inner cities and they hate Israel. So we just show everybody we're equally distant from everybody. I don't think it's had a speck of moral substance or gravity about it for the whole of this crisis.
No, it hasn't, Greg, and that's a great shame. Thank you for your time, Greg Sheridan. Great to have your company as always.